While I may have just gone through an incredibly tricky struggle of a week to get videos out for you guys, there has been a hell of a lot going on with Path of Fire and news, and I wanted to rapidly catch you all up. So today, in addition to the Mount Showcase video, where I give you all the details in one specific place, which I wanted up ages ago, honestly, today I want to give you guys as much news as I possibly can. So let's jump in. First of all, with a stress test. So, in all likelihood, for the vast majority of you watching this video, it won't be true anymore. But as I post this, it's currently Wednesday the 6th of September, and the devs just about 40 minutes ago revealed some news that there's going to be another Path of Fire stress test before the expansion comes out. And that stress test is going to be in about 24 hours. So if you guys are the early birds, be sure to mark that in and play. So this is actually the second stress test. The devs told us when Path of Fire was announced there would be some demo weekends where we could play and enjoy ourselves. Both of those have happened now. There was the PvE one, and then there was the PvP one and World vs. World one. Well, we have already had the pleasure of an extra opportunity to get in. That was last week's stress test, and while nothing particularly new was going on there, and while obviously as a stress test it meant some of us had things like infinite loading screens and network instability, we did have the advantage of one extra thing, and that's that when you play a stress test, the devs are letting us experience the elite specializations in the new maps at the same time. So that wasn't possible in the demos. Remember, we had the new maps or the elite specializations, not both together, and they're giving us both of them at once for these. It's just that you can only play for a couple of hours, and again, they're kind of stressing the servers. I guess what the devs want to do is make sure that in a world where all the new profession abilities and all the new mounts and mount abilities and a high population is there, is this going to start breaking maps? And, well, there's going to be at least 2 stress tests, the next one coming up in 24 hours to check that out. I would have interesting footage for you all of my experience in the last stress test, but I don't have any. I was editing something at the time, and by the time I got in, I was in the middle of the introductory story step to acquire a mount when it closed. So I had a grand total of about 20 minutes experience playing Renegade in PvE. I went with Renegade because Renegade is one of the elite specializations I felt was a bit on the weak side, and I wanted that real actual playtime with it to see whether I could justify that opinion. Also, Condi Rev is a lot of fun, and I've just recently been getting into. So I wish I could say I had a really great hands-on, but I got a couple of fights and then kicked out. Maybe I'll be able to make more use out of that tomorrow. I guess we'll see. So yeah, that's one thing, and that's kind of the top of the list because that's very immediate for a lot of us. But now let's move on to some other stuff. Now, the devs have been doing live streams. They've been talking about Path of Fire based stuff as we wind in. Not exactly the spectacles and major community events that they were during the Heart of Thorns days, but they have been pretty good. And in fact, I would say that the most recent live streams that the devs did was probably the best one I've seen in about 2 years. Probably the best live stream I've seen since they were, revealing to us juicy details about elite specializations way back when. And it was a live stream on mounts, so it's kind of cool that I get to talk about this here today at the same time as I've given you my showcase. But they gave us so many cool behind the scenes and extra details and interesting footage that otherwise none of us had our hands on. So at this point, most of the player base knows a lot about the Raptor. Many of us have played the Raptor. We've traveled around, we've trained it as best we can, and we've experienced what its special ability is and so on. This live stream showed so much more. It showed an equivalent experience on the Springer, the Skimmer, and the final mount, the Jackal. I keep wanting to call it Wolf, but it's the Sand Wolf that is a Jackal, and so much more. So you guys may have already seen a lot of that footage. I'll probably put a bunch more on this video here exactly, but there were a couple of highlights as well beyond that. They actually did a behind-the-scenes bug reel, and I don't remember ArenaNet doing this kind of thing too often, but it showed off a lot of the issues they had building this dramatic new system for the game. There was a lot of story about how essentially their early attempts to do mounts were having 2 separate entities in the engine that would be stitched together, and ultimately they ended up moving away from it because it was too buggy or too cumbersome and it didn't work. There are aspects of it that do still work, and apparently devs have got the opportunity to mess about with it if they like, but mounts generally are faking the appearance that they're 2 separate entities when in fact they're one. And I can kind of see how that's affected the game. You kind of get that feeling when you walk over to the Raptor initially, that the devs probably really desperately wanted you to be able to press F on the Raptor in its stable, and you'd actually climb on it, instead of having to kind of in an ugly way despawn it from in front of you and then pull one out of the ground. You can kind of tell that they were trying to get around it, but these dev stories were very interesting, and the bug reel shows some of the fantastic stuff that came from their attempts. You could just see the footage in the background. Huge stacks of players on top of one another, really really odd animation locks, and I think at one point we're seeing a bug that did exist in the live game for a while, and that's when a Mesmer traits for Duelist Deception, where they can create a clone on dodge. If they were in a Norn transform and they dodge, they'd create all these infinitely lasting bear forms that would use bear form abilities. It was brilliant, and I think maybe something similar was happening with mounts as well, and we're seeing some footage of it, where you could just spawn infinite raptors that would run around. Really cool. It's also funny to me because I remember when Heart of Thorns was coming out, they introduced the idea of mounted enemies to us, yeah? Remember, we had the mounted Hylek, we had some varieties of Mordrum that were mounted. And I remember discussing on my channel 2 years ago this idea of, oh, are these Hylek actually separate entities or just one that's faking it? And we had a lot of discussion about that, and well, that came back here. It also makes me curious, since that almost feels like a hint now, during the Heart of Thorns days, all mounts are going to be coming. I wonder if we'll see any similar thing for Expansion 3 once Path of Fire comes out. Wouldn't that be quite curious? Another incredibly awesome moment in this stream was, in addition to this story about connecting separate creatures together, they demonstrated what it would be like to just walk up to anything in the game and mount it and adopt its skill bar and ride around on it. And so the demonstration we got was the coolest possible creature, if you're going to demo such a thing, a Wyvern Matriarch, or the Patriarch. I think it was actually the Patriarch from Verdant Brink. So here in this footage, you can see a dev casually climb aboard a Wyvern and not only ride it in kind of a fun way, but also be able to use all of its skills, attack things, kill things, fly up into the sky. It's fantastic, and it's one of these interesting moments that makes you remember that essentially all the enemies you fight in Guild Wars 2, they're executing skills in a similar way than you would. You can almost imagine that they're AI controlled and the AI has its own skill bar as it executes this stuff. Really fun. I think some people saw this and got a bit carried away and started saying, oh, why aren't we going to be allowed to do this in the expansion? ArenaNet are so stupid. Why are they such the fun police? I do think it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that this would actually work in the MMO. Maybe in a story instance, maybe. But it was very fun as a part of the stream, and I'd really recommend you guys go check it out, watch the whole thing, because they gave us lots of cool little details, how die channels work on various mounts and so forth. We even got concept art, so that's the last thing I'll talk about with the stream. They showed us concept art from early on of different mounts they were playing with. We all know that we've got 4 now, potentially 5 with this Griffin when we're looking at Living World Season 4, and that remains to be seen. But we've narrowed down to these 4. Some of the early concepts for other types of mounts are really interesting. Reddit became particularly smitten with this one here of an Asuran riding a Corgi. But some others caught my eye. Like, I think they're actually showing a Destroyer mount there. And some of these other sort of deserty looking creatures look quite fantastic too. So I think that was a very nice thing as well to do a bit of a freeze frame on and check out what the devs had been toying with. Who knows if we'll get mount skins, how kind of extreme they'll be, and whether we'll see some of these designs come back. I guess that's just a matter of time. Mounts are weird as well because there's definitely an undercurrent of some mounts work really well for some races but not others. Like a Corgi mount works very well for an Asura, sure. It doesn't work for a Norn. Or does it? Beyond the streams, over on ArenaNet's YouTube channel, they've been super busy as well. So they did a developer diary about a week ago on mounts, which is kind of a fluffy version of what I've made myself on this very day, where they just give you an overview of what's going on with the mounts. It's sort of an extended trailer, if you will. They've had individual trailers for all of the elite specializations up there for a while. In fact, if you watch my series on the elite specialization, you've watched those trailers. Those are what they didn't have time to do in Heart of Thorns fully, but they'd managed to on this one, so that's nice. But there is an extra series called Behind the Sound. So it's sort of a behind the scenesy thing where you get to see the sound crew make some of the interesting noises that have been filtered throughout the game. The devs really do love making use of that sound crew. They've appeared on a lot of different streams showing off their art and their craft, and well, that tradition of putting them up online a lot continues here, I guess. So if you guys are bored, maybe you can check that out at the end of this video. Then lastly, they've been doing these things called developer diaries. So that mount video I mentioned earlier was a developer diary. They've also done one on the elite specializations, and just as I make this video, they've done one on story.
Returning to Alona and Crystal Desert is something that we have been planning for from the beginning of the launch of Guild Wars 2.
We're bringing back old gods. Why not visit old places?
It was a pretty easy decision to go back to Alona, to give players a little dose of what they've had before, but expanded, and to perpetuate the story we've begun and to address some of the major questions players have had.
So if you do some real frame-by-frame analysis on this developer diary, I'm pretty sure you can get snippets of upcoming story moments that would spoil the plot in small amounts. Like, I can definitely see on one of these moments, and I won't show it on the video, I'll spoil it for you guys. You can check it out if you'd like for yourself. I can definitely see a combination of 3 characters are all going to be together in a certain scene at a certain place in an upcoming story instance, and maybe if I really cared to, I could start figuring out exactly what they say. But hey, it's only a few weeks away, and why would I want to spoil it at this point? Maybe you guys can have fun there. But they talk a bit about their philosophy of going into this story in this expansion, how they're treating the characters, what they want to do. I think we've already heard a lot of this stuff through interviews and general comments before this video came out, but I did pick up some interesting stuff. Like, they said that they'd always been planning to go back to Alona. That I wouldn't have actually been certain of maybe 3 years ago when they were initially playing with Living World Season 1, especially as well, even rewinding the clock a little bit further. Did they always plan to go back to Alona? Were we maybe going to go to new territories? I'm very happy that they were always planning to come back here, though, because I think this is one of the richer areas of the world building to return to. There's a specific moment where one of the devs says, "We're fighting a god this time around," blah, 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 blah. And so the meaning of that is obvious. They're talking about Balthazar instead of fighting an elder dragon, or that's what we think as we start. But the phrasing makes it almost sound like maybe we're not going to fight an elder dragon at all the whole way through, which is really weird to me. I would expect us to deal with both Balthazar and Kraukatoric. So what do you guys think? Are we going to be coming out of this expansion with another dead elder dragon or not? I actually think that's a really interesting question to ask, given the way that everything has been framed right now. And maybe it could actually swing either way. I'd be really curious what you guys think. Will Kraukatoric be dead by the end of this expansion? And really think about the possibilities behind that question. Moving on, we've got a moment where we see shots of Casimir, there's a shot of Kanak, and a shot of Ellen Keel, as the devs are talking about which characters they should use. I wouldn't be surprised if Bram wasn't in this expansion. I remember in my interview with the devs, they said we're gonna, be a bit more frugal about what characters are in the story and why they're there, and use them, properly instead of sort of shoehorning everyone in, which is sort of what they did in Heart of Thorns. It's funny, Heart of Thorns was a very self-contained small little story, like a little side adventure really, where we just romped through the jungle and that's it, and it didn't really reach anywhere else in the franchise. It didn't look towards any of the core Tyria areas. It was all just very, very focused on that march towards Morgemoth. And weirdly, I wouldn't mind if the Crystal as much as I disliked that about Heart of Thorns, I wouldn't mind if our return to the Crystal Desert and Alone and stuff kind of felt like that here, just because in the first game when we went to the Crystal Desert, that's kind of what that whole arc was. It was separate from the rest of the world. It was isolated. It was distant, not just in terms of the fact there were no routable walks that you could do outside of story missions to get to the Crystal Desert, but everything about it was like a break in the Massart White Mantle conflict and the Shining Blade conflict, and once you were done, once you descended, you sort of were thrust back into the action in the Southern Shiver Peaks and things resumed. It'd be interesting if then in Guild Wars 2, when we returned to this region of the world, they kind of followed a similar idea to make us feel isolated in the desert again. But of course, the expansion is a lot more than just the Crystal Desert. It's Alona as well, and that was obviously very connected into its own stories. So we'll see what they do, but apparently a few less characters. There's also some great talk about using Rytlock in this expansion, and of course there's the fact that Rytlock has been to the Crystal Desert before. Very few characters can say that. Rytlock can. Now, when we met Rytlock in the demo, he really didn't talk very much along these lines. He didn't give us anything super interesting, but I'm guessing as we get closer to Glint's lair and as we get to where Kraukatoric was hanging out and the events of the second novel, all of that could get very, very interesting. And if you guys want to kill time as well before the expansion come out, as much as I hate the book and the way it's written, maybe give Edge of Destiny a shot, because at least it will give you some of that backstory that Rytlock will ultimately be divulging into with us. I mean, we might even get some cool SNAF stories here. That would be very fun. So that's the developer diary on story. That does have accompanying with it on the official website a kind of overview, a franchise, not a Guild Wars 2 overview, sort of a franchise overview of this region of the world and what's going on. It's called Developer Diary, Guild Wars 2 Path of Fire, Road to the Desert. And what the devs are doing on this blog post, which I thoroughly recommend you guys check out, is they are trying to teach all the new players and uninformed players about this region of the world and what we have to expect in it as we travel to it. Because this is a really important region of the world that's had massive, monumental, fun things going on, like the fact it was once upon a time an ocean and then it wasn't, and we've had so many layers of different stories. The the Zephyrite's treks there, the attempt to defeat Kralkatorrik in one of the novels, the Guild Wars 1 story stuff, and then when you look at Nightfall itself is this huge different continental region, right, that has all of its own history, its own way of counting time, and the various dynasties that had existed in the past, all the stuff with Palawa Joko. The devs tried to condense all of that down into a quick, digestible timeline for you that you can read in about 5 to 10 minutes. And there are some interesting things in there. I don't know, if you guys want me to, leave in the comments if you want to see this. If you want, I'll read this verbatim for you and we'll dive into it a little bit more deeply. I'll give you some of that experience and knowledge that I have having played the game. But there are some fun things. Immediately, what strikes me as perhaps a contradiction, though. So let's dive in. Right at the start, the beginning of the timeline, the devs say this. The year 786 before the Exodus, the gods arrive and they brought friends. So the devs here, right now, in 2017, before Path of Fire comes out, the devs say that the 6 gods first appear in Cantha during this year, bringing humanity with them. Like gardeners starting a new patch, they transplant human beings to this lush new world, working the soil and tending their seabeds to ensure the new crop will take root, spread, and thrive. Now, what they described there is really exciting to me because that is consistent with early Cantha lore. So, rewinding the clock a long way, that's consistent with early Cantha lore that suggested humans started there in the very south, then they moved up, and then to Alona and so forth. So that all works very well, and that's consistent with the earliest stuff we have. However, in 2012, we heard right at the end of the personal story when we communicate with the Reapers of Grenth. Remember, these are entities in association with Grenth himself. We hear at that point that the gods first stepped onto Tyria, not at Cantha, but they first stepped down at Or, at the Artesian waters, what is probably something akin to a ley line hub. In fact, the gods were probably drawn to this location from the mist because of all the magic here, and that's how they ended up at Tyria. And they started there, not in Cantha, there. So this line that the devs now tell us in 2017 is not consistent with 2012, but is consistent with even earlier. So where's the mistake? Is it right now, or was it the personal story? You guys know how much I loathe the inconsistencies and issues with the personal story, so maybe we can blame that. But that's a curious thing to me that immediately struck me. But I love seeing them reference that. They reference stuff like the Scarab Plague. The Scarab Plague is one of my favorite set pieces of like world building and deep history from any of the stuff in Guild Wars 1. It's just generally really fun. It's quite dark as well, the stuff to do with the Scarab Plague, if you check out the Guild Wars 1 quest based on it. But yeah, I don't know. If you guys want to see more on this specific thing, maybe I'll crank out a quick little video where we read through this timeline and we talk about it a bit more in depth. So that's kind of the big stuff that's come from ArenaNet. In still some kind of newsy type things, there obviously have been updates going on in game. There was a new glider that was just added. There's been a lot of discussion from the player base at the moment about mount skins and how crazy the devs should feel they are at liberty to go if mount skins become a thing, because remember, then it's still not confirmed right now. So, you know, do we have really jokey, silly mount skins? Do we have mount skins that are as crazy and wild as gliders? And they just added another crazy glider. It's a Meteor, so you can see the footage right now. I snapped this bad boy up very quickly. Supposedly, if you run a certain spider tonic, which has always had ridiculous scaling issues with various effects, you can get an enormous glider, or an enormous meteor, I should say, that comes flying through the air, and I look forward to abusing that for as long as possible until maybe finally the devs change the Halloween spider, which has always flagged up weird issues like this. And really, a little bit back now, but still newsy enough, and something I hadn't mentioned, it has been the 5th anniversary of Guild Wars 2, guys. There was another stream before this mount one. They did a stream about, you know, kind of the history of ArenaNet as a company and the game, the franchise, and where it's gone, because it was year number 5. Year number 5 is really striking and odd to me, because I have a very clear, very specific memory of being in year 5 of Guild Wars 1, and at that point for that game, it very much felt like it was already past its prime and moving on from its heyday, and that, you know, the best days of Guild Wars 1 were long gone by its 5th anniversary, and we were kind of all waiting and the game was shriveling away. And yet for Guild Wars 2, it feels like we're still in the early years to me. It feels like we're just starting to now hit the stride, and we're starting to get really good content speed, and especially once Path of Fire fully comes out and Season 4 is well under its way. When Season 4 is on episode 2, 3, 4, I think around there you will really be able to look at this section of the game and say, wow, this is Guild Wars 2 in its heyday. This is Guild Wars 2 with the most high quality, consistently high quality and decent content being pushed into it. And that's strange, isn't it? It's really weird to think about how Guild Wars 1 felt so far after its release compared to Guild Wars 2. And so, yeah, with the 5th anniversary, there were pretty cool updates in game as well. You got your selection of a die again. You got your selection of that backpack from last year. But as well, there's a new weapon set that they've given as well. And you can only pick, I think it is 2 weapons per year. And so that will take people a long time to finish that off. And the 5th anniversary was a thing, which I just hadn't talked about. So there you go, guys. That's my crash course. I'm sorry that I didn't go into as much detail as I usually would about these kinds of things. That's my crash course on all this little stuff that's been going on. Remember the stress test. And hopefully now that some of my issues in real life have been settled down, I should be able to be a bit more consistent with the productions I want to have going out. We're rapidly moving now into a space where we'll be looking at episode 6. So thanks very much for sticking about, guys, especially to people who are on Patreon and I wasn't able to respond to or anything while my 2-factor authentication was broke. I offer sincere apologies and thanks so much for sticking about, even though it was a bit wobbly, and hopefully we'll roll into it very, very soon. Let me know how it's been going on your end, guys. Take care and see you very shortly.